Over the past 11 years, Final Fantasy XIV has undergone one of, if not the biggest redemption arcs in the history of video gaming. It's fair to say that, given the stature of the company and the expectations that were created based on the success of Final Fantasy XI, when Final Fantasy XIV launched on the 30th of September 2010 worldwide, that what greeted fans was pretty dismal. There were glimpses of what the developers had been striving for, and in some respects the game did look gorgeous, but those who had taken part in the beta were left dismayed that almost none of the glaring issues had been addressed when the game launched, such as the map system not showing where party members were in comparison to your own player character, which would lead to an annoying game of Marco Polo, there being no way to sort your inventory, and let's not get started on the fatigue system and battle regimen. Over the years, Naoki Yoshida and his task force managed to turn the ship around and have now taken things much further, to the point where Final Fantasy XIV is the game that everyone's talking about. Needless to say, due to how long that's all taken and how methodical the developers have been throughout the process, there are plenty of stories to tell about changes that were made throughout the game's development and fun elements that have been included. And today, we're going to run through some of those stories that are perhaps lesser known, as well as throwing in some interesting insights and lots of little bonus facts. And in that regard, we're going to be starting off with our first fact, which relates to how Square Enix has chosen to distinguish those who weathered the bad times and stuck with the game, even through some trying periods. After the original version of Final Fantasy XIV started to become a more stable product, Square Enix launched a few initiatives to try and entice former players back, and reward those who had stuck with the game throughout everything that had happened. Two of the initiatives were called the Legacy Campaign and the Welcome Back Campaign, with the latter offering a free trial to players who reactivated their old accounts, and the former offering the Legacy Subscription Package, which would grant players a considerable discount on their monthly subscription fee for as long as they continued to play the game. The following year, after the original version of Final Fantasy XIV had been shut down and focus had shifted towards A Realm Reborn, Square Enix further detailed how original players would be looked after. Not only would they be able to access the game without needing to repurchase, but they'd also be able to play it before the official start date, and those who had purchased the Collector's Edition would be given a few bonus items, such as the Helm of Light and a baby Behemoth minion, at no extra charge. That wasn't all though. Players who had fulfilled the legacy criteria, irrespective of the version that they had purchased, would gain access to in-game items to help distinguish themselves as veterans. They included the wonderful looking Legacy Chocobo, the option to have their character's name mentioned in the game's credits, and they would also receive the famed Legendary Mark, a very distinguishable tattoo that would be displayed on their character's upper back to help with some flexing. But perhaps due to how visible the mark could be, the developers also included the option to hide it away using a text command if you wanted to just be a bit more incognito. Now, sound has been a prominent part of Final Fantasy XIV, and that was the case even before the revival started to take shape. In the initial sense, Nobuo Uematsu acted as the main composer, with Masayoshi Soken serving as the director of the wider sound section that consisted of 10 other people, 6 sound designers, 2 programmers, 1 project manager, and 1 project assistant. At the game's relaunch as A Realm Reborn, compositional duties had shifted over to Soken, with Uematsu only composing the main theme, and the sound division was increased in size to a team of 12. By the release of Shadowbringers, the team has had significant expansion, with 3 specific arrangers hired to work alongside Soken, 15 sound designers, 2 audio programmers, 4 project managers, and 2 project assistants. That takes the grand total to now 26 individuals, a huge increase in comparison to that original team. The increase is understandable due to the sheer scale of the game, but it's also because as the developers wanted to keep upping the standard, some of the sound requests have become very unconventional, such as the request for them to make a sound effect that would depict some pretty vomit. But perhaps one of the more interesting stories came from how the team created the sounds of the gremlin that featured in the opening cinematic of Shadowbringers. Soken revealed in a blog post on the official Square Enix website that he assigned the task of creating the gremlin's voice to a junior member of the team, but after numerous attempts, they just couldn't create something that sounded compelling enough. Soken revealed that as a last-ditch effort, the team member went home over the weekend, took a hand recorder, and went into his closet to discreetly record what he believed a gremlin may sound like, while trying not to disturb the rest of his family. What he came back with sounded much closer to what they needed, and after some sprucing up, it's that recording from the team member's closet that was used in the final version. Goblins have featured heavily across the entirety of the Final Fantasy franchise, but it wasn't until Final Fantasy XI that they started to gain a bit more of a starring role. Numerous goblins would be encountered as part of the narrative, but even though some had unique identifiers to help denote their importance to the wider story, it was almost impossible from a visual perspective to understand whether the goblin you were speaking to was either male or female, and that's where the naming conventions came in. The team working on Final Fantasy XI thought they should create a naming system that would help players to identify a goblin's gender, and it would see the given forename of each goblin have a specific suffix. Ix would be used to signify a male goblin, and Ox would be used to signify a female goblin. When work was underway on Final Fantasy XIV, the role of goblins was carried over from Final Fantasy XI, with them featuring near identical appearances, speech patterns, and of course, naming conventions. So if you've ever wondered about the gender of the goblin you're speaking to, such as Mutamix Bubblypots, who can be found in Central Thanalan, just take a look at their name and you'll have your answer. Unfortunately, it's not 100% foolproof, as some goblins don't have Ix or Ox at the end of their forename, such as Quick Things All Thoughts, but it should still apply to a decent proportion of the goblins featured in the game. One of the coolest parts of the transition between Final Fantasy XIV and A Realm Reborn was how the development team handled the graceful sunset of the original game before they went full on with their preparations for a successor. As this sunsetting loomed, players started to prepare for what became known as the end of an era, and it saw thousands upon thousands of loyal supporters gather near the game's capital cities to mark their presence at such a pivotal moment in the game's history. But something else happened in the weeks prior that ended up being so impactful that the writers decided to include references to it within the game's lore. As the calamity loomed, to try and bring about a heightened state, the developers and game masters started to spawn stronger and stronger enemies at random outside the game's cities for players to fend off, as, well, they thought it would be a rather fitting thing to happen when the end was nigh. In response, players assembled to tackle these dangerous foes, and it led to the creation of the Great Good Boy Wall of Uldar across numerous servers. It would see players summon their Good Boy mounts to form a massive wall around the entrances of Uldar, something that would prevent the larger monsters from entering the city, and it was an amazing sight to see. As a sign of respect, a monument was created in A Realm Reborn, and at the beginning of the questline that involved searching for the Enterprise, Father Illard made reference to the events that transpired, making them an official part of the game's canon. To further this, the Rising 2018 seasonal event also had a focus on the Great Good Boy Wall, as players could experience a scripted flashback that relived what happened in the build-up to the calamity. After taking over from Hiromichi Tanaka and Nobuaki Komoto, Naoki Yoshida worked with Kazutoyo Mahiro and an extensive team of writers to craft a new Eorzea ahead of its relaunch as A Realm Reborn. It would still contain some of the same major city-states, and there would also be a few characters that would reappear, but for the most part, it was a fresh narrative, and that required the creation of an entirely new suite of NPCs, many of which would remain at the forefront of Final Fantasy XIV's story as it was expanded by Heavensward, Stormblood, and Shadowbringers. But even though many of these characters have been impactful, with Yoshitola even becoming something of a representative for the game, something that has seen her appear in numerous other Final Fantasy properties like Dissidia NT, World of Final Fantasy, and even the manga series called Final Fantasy Lost Stranger, it's another one of the elite supporting cast that Yoshida has the closest bond with. Alphinaud Levelier appeared in A Realm Reborn as the grandson of Louis Soir and served as one of the main companions for the Warrior of Light, a role he has continued to play as the storyline has evolved. But beyond that, Yoshida revealed to us when we spoke to him back in 2017 that Alphinaud is perhaps his favourite character. The subject came up when we asked about who Yoshida would like to see added to Dissidia NT. Yoshida said he would love to see Nail or Xenos added, with the latter of that pairing actually being added to Dissidia NT in the April 2019 update, but Yoshida also shared that if there was a possibility to add another member to Cosmos' side alongside Yoshitola, he would love to see it be Alphinaud, as due to everything that's happened, he often relates to him as he would a brother. Another interesting aspect to the game's lore relates to how magic is portrayed, as while the Warrior of Light is able to train and master a huge variety of jobs related to magical disciplines, very few other characters exist within the game's lore that either have an affinity with magic or are active practitioners. This is in direct contrast to Final Fantasy XI, where mages like Shan Toto were plentiful, and it was very much a purposeful decision, as many of the job descriptions even talk about their respective histories and why those who practice the art are so few in number. In the case of the Black and White mages, the Lodestone revealed that the arcane arts were known to corrupt the judgment of mortal men, leading them to use their powers for self-gain as opposed to helping those in need. Due to this, only a handful of white mages exist outside of the Warrior of Light. Dark Knights are also few in number, as are astrologians, and as summoners and scholars were lost to the ages, the Warrior of Light helps to revive those specific disciplines. It's something that has helped to define the Warrior of Light as a special individual within the game's lore, but obviously, as there are millions of Warriors of Light running around, being a mage isn't that unique in the wider scheme of Final Fantasy XIV. And with that interesting lore tidbit, we're going to move on to something a bit more discreet and juicy. That the story of patch 5.25, which was part of Echoes of a Fallen Star, was based on concepts that were never used for Vagrant Story 2. During Matsuno's time at Square, and then subsequently Square Enix, he worked on two pretty memorable games, Final Fantasy Tactics and Vagrant Story. Due to the impact they had, sequels were considered for both properties, but Sakaguchi had bigger ideas, and assigned Matsuno to first work on helping to establish Play Online, and then to Final Fantasy XII. Even though sequels for those two original properties didn't ever materialise, Matsuno held onto the proposals, and at the start of 2020 began to release small snippets about Vagrant Story 2, and teased that if fans were patient, they might yet see something, and he even hinted that it may be in relation to his collaboration with Yoshida. Yoshida himself has been a long-time admirer of Matsuno, crediting Tactics Ogre as the game that inspired him to become a game creator himself, with his decision to apply at Square Enix even driven by the potential for him to work alongside Matsuno. That ultimately did not happen, but after a long time, Yoshida was able to realise that desire by collaborating with Matsuno on Return to Ivalice, which was part of Stormblood. 2 years later, they would collaborate again for an optional storyline called Save the Queen, which featured in Shadowbringers, and it was this optional storyline that would resurface concepts that were originally planned for Vagrant Story 2. Many months after those cryptic tweets, Matsuno and Yoshida conducted an interview with Japanese publication Famitsu, where the truth was laid bare, as well as part of the reason why those concepts were resurfaced. The story goes that Yoshida gave Matsuno a very tight turnaround time to complete the storyline, and with only a fortnight available, instead of trying to come up with something new from scratch, Matsuno turned to ideas that were previously rejected, and he believed that a story originally planned for Vagrant Story 2 would be just what they were looking for. And with that, I think we're done. They were 7 facts about Final Fantasy XIV that we feel you probably didn't know, and as always, we've thrown in a load of little bonus facts along the way for good measure. I'm pretty sure though there are still some amongst you who knew them all, but let us know in the comments below which you found to be the most interesting, and of course, if you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. I'd also like to thank Eco on our Discord server for helping out with the creation of this video, and on that note, if you enjoy our content, also play Final Fantasy XIV, and want some like-minded people to hang out with, I'd recommend checking out our Discord server. There's a link in the pinned comment. Alright guys, this is Daryl signing out. I'd like to extend a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, especially Raining, Ekim, Benjamin Snow and Gregory, who are super special Onion Knight supporters, and of course a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.